Hello, folks. Welcome to this week's Tarah Talks. It's a pleasure to have you with us today. With me today is Louis Kowolowski. He is a killer Infosec professional and has done a lot of hiring in the security and Infosec fields. I know some amazing and creative people who are hackers and Infosec professionals. Louis is not only that, he's someone who's done a lot of hiring in the field as well, which is really important if you are somebody who has never hired an information security professional before. Louis, tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Thanks, Tarah. I have been doing, I guess, computer-related stuff for probably 15 to 20 years. Mostly started out as Unix and networking. Later on, I got interested in computer security, and I've worked for places like Symantec, PGP Corporation, and Silent Circle.
And Silent Circle, I think I heard you say in there, any smidge on your end. So yeah, and in those positions, how many of them did you have a hiring manager position where you were conducting interviews and hiring InfoSec professionals?
Actually, all three of the ones that I mentioned, I was involved in interviewing.
Okay. And something that many of you folks might not know, one of the reasons that Louis is here today is not just because he's an awesome human being that I know has experience in this field, but Louis has actually hired me as an information security professional as I was doing consulting for Silent Circle. So one of the reasons that I have Louis here is the same reason that I often have folks to have part of this conversation, is because I've actually experienced that they're good at their job, and Louis is good at his job. He was great through the hiring process. He was a great boss and a good friend. Now he's a great friend and colleague. Like I've told so many of you folks before, in technology, you never know who's going to be the boss and who's going to be the employee one day. So today, you know, Louis and I are buds and friends, and it is a pleasure to have him here specifically to talk about that. So Louis, talk a little bit about some of the things that you look for as someone who hires information security professionals and how you talk about that to non-technical people who are part of the hiring process.
Okay. I think probably the first thing I would say is that when I'm looking for somebody in information security, I want to know that they have experience outside of information security. That may not be intuitive in the beginning, but the big reasons for that are, well, they boil down to you can't secure something if you don't know how it works. This is true for systems in general, whether it's a Unix box, a Windows box, a mobile phone. It's true of databases. It's true of networks. Another place where that comes in is when you have to deal with other business units outside of, for example, IT or engineering, who may not know or understand or perhaps even care a whole lot about information security, other than the company has to succeed and make money, which of course is the driving factor. And business units that are not technical, information security people still have to be able to communicate with them. If someone in information security doesn't understand the key parts of, for example, accounting, they can't possibly secure those aspects that accounting needs to do to get their work done. The same is true for sales, marketing, etc. So that's why I look for somebody who has a broad background. They may have a degree in information security. They may not have a college a computer science degree. The more well-rounded you are, I think, the better of an information security person you're going to make. So that's probably the biggest thing that I would look for, and hopefully that's explained in a way that you don't have to be particularly technical to understand.
It is that well-rounded background is important for so many things, not just creativity, but also to show that you can think broadly. Somebody who's just a tool user doesn't necessarily always make the best information security professional, I think, just having seen it. Most of the people that I know in InfoSec are wildly creative. They have weird and strange backgrounds. They often got into tech late in life. Most of them, hell, most of them don't have any kind of degree that is even remotely related to information security. So one thing that I've really noticed is there tends to be these two trends when people try to hire an InfoSec professional. I was asked this, one of the reasons we're having this conversation now is I was asked this recently by one of my friends she's a startup CEO here in town too. She said, I'm not an InfoSec. I need to hire somebody and I don't know how to evaluate what I'm looking at. And I understand that experience. Sometimes I have a hard time reading the resumes of people who are in jobs like finance and marketing, even though I need to be able to hire them. The words on those resumes don't carry any connotations. They don't mean anything to me. And so I guess what I would ask you is, as I talk to my fellow hackers and awesome people in InfoSec, what I often see is two different directions in companies. One, they go with like stacks of certifications and degrees and figure it's a safe hire. And the other is they look for shibboleths, is the best way that I can put it. And one of those kinds of shibboleths might be, someone who's spoken at DEF CON, or someone who's well known in the hacker community, or who has had a certain amount of ink about their hacks, and they seem like a good person now kind of situation. I think I'm going to know the answer to this question already, but which direction would you go? And if so, why?
I think in large part, the answer is going to be it depends. You were initially talking about somebody who doesn't necessarily have technical expertise and who will need to hire somebody technical. And for that, I think in many cases, you can rely on a combination of recommendations that are going to come with the person. And that's going to tell you whether or not they can actually do what they say they can in technical terms that you don't necessarily have to care about. If I tell you that I can mumble do stuff, and you check some references, and yes, it's true that I can mumble do stuff, that's good. Now you can move on to caring about things like, can I solve problems? And that's a generic enough question that you can pose, and it doesn't have to be technical. You can put somebody in a room and give them a problem and ask them how they would go about solving it. Maybe it's something that they solve in the room, maybe it's not. That may not even be terribly important whether or not they solve the problem, as much as can you see the process going through their head and how they would go about it? Because that's going to tell you what's going to happen when they encounter a problem that they don't necessarily know the answer to, and that answer is going to be whether or not they're a good fit for your company.
I agree. And sometimes I've seen people who solve problems like that. The ones that I see are successful at it often are very quick to recognize what they do and don't know, and they've often built up a really good community of people around them who have those kinds of specialties they can reach out to.
Yeah.
I think something that's very common in the startup world is to want a full stack X. You want a full stack marketer, you want a full stack suit, you want a full stack front-end web developer, or just web developer period, you want a full stack database person, and now I'm seeing this kind of rise of the full stack InfoSec professional who's the drop-in human who just handles all that stuff for you. Often it's combined with IT inside the company, which I think is a terrible idea, since they're two drastically different skill sets and two different internal customer sets that you're really servicing. But that full stack situation tends to only work really well if you've got a really big community of people that you can draw on and support. So I guess the question I would ask you is, for people that are non-technical at all trying to hire an InfoSec professional, that's a rough gig, but you can almost just rely on the network. If you're technical and you want to try to hire an InfoSec professional, what are some of the things that you're looking for in the kind of person that they are? And I guess what I'm getting at is things like ethics and the work that they've done in public and what code they've put out there. What are some of the technical skill sets you would expect to see? Not just in general terms, but specific ones.
Probably the first thing would be to take a look at the requisite Google search. Things that are going to flag immediately are probably going to be fairly self-evident. If somebody has a habit of publishing 0 days without giving anybody notice, you're probably going to see that in the top 5 hits when you plug their name in. And you know, this is perhaps one thing where not seeing information can be just as useful as seeing information, because if you look for example, some kind of misbehavior and nothing comes up, that gives you an idea that somebody is behaving in a way that you may like. Does that make sense?
It sort of does, and I'm always asking myself about the dogs that aren't barking, which is sort of the question you're asking right there.
Yes.
It's always interesting to see, especially because the people that are the curators of what we see are often Infosec professionals themselves. So if you have a modicum of skill set, you can figure out how to make sure that some of this stuff never pops to the top in a simple Google search.
Right.
One of the questions I often get asked is, why would I hire a hacker? They're all criminals. And I was like, well, the problem that you see with that, you know, friend John or friend Jane, is that I think on average, every American commits something like 3 felonies and 1,000 misdemeanors a day without even realizing it. And often the sense of humor and skill set that goes with being a hacker is more pointing that out than actually deliberately committing felonies. And often people who are found to be uncomfortably in violation of what is right and ethical in the corporate world and in the governmental world by hackers often react more poorly to being found out than the fact that they were misbehaving in the first place, and sometimes have the tools to make people miserable about it. There's a lot of poster children in the hacker community who've been targeted by corporations, by governments, who, because they found a serious vulnerability, were themselves treated as the attack vector as opposed to an information source. So I generally try to point that out. And I guess the question I would have for you, Louis, is how do you tell the difference between a real life white hat and a black hat hacker? And how do you define that? And if you could just talk a little bit more about what those are for people who are looking at this.
Sure. That reminds me a little bit of why you would ever hire a lockpick. And perhaps that's an example where it becomes self-evident. You locked yourself out, but at the same time, you have someone who can get into your house. Does that mean that they're going to do so without your permission? And the answer is not necessarily. Are there people who misbehave? Of course there are. There are always people who misbehave, but that doesn't mean that everybody does. And I think this is, again, something that you can turn up by doing some searches on the internet, and you can talk with references to get a sense of what kind of a person is this. They may have things like certified ethical hacker.
What's that?
That will probably give you a sense that they're going in the right direction. But one of the things to keep in mind about certifications is that when you get down to it, all that you know is that the person can pass a test to get a certification. It doesn't actually tell you who the person is, and that's why I would focus more on talking with people who know the individual in question to get a better sense of who the people are.
Okay, let me ask you something, and this is, I don't think I've ever actually asked you this before. You made a pretty rapid decision about me and my character based on the technical work. And this is several years ago, folks, about the technical work that I had done by looking at who I was on the internet. You looked at my blog and at the tech stuff that I had posted, the skill sets that I had and that had demonstrated in Code Online. What was the thing that made you realize that I would be a good fit for the company? Not necessarily even just a good fit for that company, but someone that you would trust with the keys to the you know, to the gold with the cookie jar lid. What is the thing that makes you feel that way about somebody online?
That's difficult to generalize. Perhaps specifically some things about you. It's not difficult to discover that there are certain causes that you publicly fight for. And it's not difficult to also figure out that you are committed to causes, but not necessarily extreme about them. And I mean that not in the sense that you aren't wholly committed, but that you are not somebody who will take radical action to try to get something done. And sorry, go ahead.
No, I lost some of what you said right there from a cutout, and I'll probably ask you. I think it's a great post for you to write later on, actually, Louis. How do you get a sense for a hacker online and whether or not you want to trust them or not? But what I was just noting right there is, can you generalize that even a little bit more to the kind of person who just seems like they wouldn't take radical action, that they are trustworthy and have, online? What are the things that make you feel that about seeing anyone's profile?
That's difficult. We're getting out of the technical and into the touchy-feely, and that's not only difficult to explain, it's even more difficult to codify and teach someone else, because much of it is gut feel, the kind of thing that you can meet someone and instantly have an odd feeling about them and you have no idea why. Or you instantly meet someone and you know that you like them, but you can't really explain why. So I don't know that I have a really good answer for that, unfortunately.
You're cutting out a little bit on me, Louis. Can you hear me fine now?
I can hear you now.
Okay, just a little bit of cutout. Sorry about that. What I'm doing is just kind of doing a quick little refresher, and hopefully that'll help fix some of this. Okay, so what I basically got from that was you saw me tied to me, and I would imagine at this point, basically anybody that you hire, you look for who that person knows and whether or not they have some degree of respect from people or connections to them online, such that they don't seem to be atomistic, right? They have ties to other people. They're part of a reputation network, if that makes sense. Does that make sense? That's kind of something that I've been grappling with in my head too, as it comes to hiring, and that's hiring across the board. When you don't know anything really about the field that you're hiring someone into, you have to find somebody that is theoretically better at it than you, and yet you don't know how to evaluate them. So really, as I try to hire somebody who is an accountant for a living, who does sales or marketing, I don't have specialties in these areas, and I need people who are much better at it and that can tell me how to do it. So I don't really have any real way of evaluating them that works for me other than looking at their reputation network and seeing how prominent it is and whether or not they seem like they are moderate people that won't do that radical action, that won't cause me problems, basically. So, and it's kind of ironic because hackers are often seen as kind of the lone wolves of the technical community, and it's hard sometimes to get them to tie into networks. I was asked about some warning signs for the people that you're talking about. You explain why you would hire someone. Now tell me why, if you were given somebody who has a degree in Infosec and has 3 certifications, and they're a CISSP, XJ43, CK426, whatever, why would you not hire them after that Google search? What would you see that would cause a problem for you beyond the obvious, like currently in lawsuit versus FBI?
I guess probably a lot of it would come back to what I hear talking from people in what you call their reputation network, which I think is a good way to describe it, and also the information that you get back from your internet searches, and I think that's probably going to paint a fairly reasonable picture. It's never going to be black and white, but you should get a strong enough either shade of gray or shade of light something where you can make a decision and say, I think this person is probably going to be a good fit if they are on the edge. The other thing, if I guess I would say also listen to your gut. And if you're not sure of somebody that's on the edge and your gut says yes, okay, there's probably something there that you're not consciously recognizing that's telling you something is okay. But simultaneously, if your gut says no, there's probably something subconscious that you're not seeing that you may want to pay attention to your inner signals, as it were. And if somebody is too close to the edge, you may want to steer clear.
Thank you. It's a good question to lead me into the next question, which is about that kind of unconscious hiring. I think one of the things that I talk about a lot is unconscious bias when it comes to things like sexism and technical hiring. And that's certainly a factor in Infosec, where we even more so than the tech population at large, very much have this idea of what a hacker should look like. And I think there's a big difference between unconscious bias that stops us from making good decisions based on kind of how we envision someone should be in terms of their look and what kind of actions and speech patterns they have, and deliberately training your instinct and listening to your gut. Because you're talking about gut, I get it. I know exactly what you mean by that, because what I've done is take a set of skills and things that I'm looking for in people and kind of set them aside and go, am I getting close to the Venn diagram of this person intersecting reasonably well with what I'm looking for in this person in terms of trustworthiness, integrity, and stuff? How do you separate out what might be your own unconscious bias from this instinct about what's going to make a good InfoSec professional? I know you do this consciously, but can you talk a little bit more about it?
Probably the biggest thing is that I try to avoid, and I obviously can't always do it, but I try to avoid pictures of people until I have already come up with a fair amount of information on the person so that I can make a decision without seeing what they look like at all.
What a great idea. How can you even do that with Google?
Sometimes you get surprises and you see someone and you know, your eyes open up wide. You're like, whoa, that's not what I imagined at all. But you know, that's okay. There's not a problem with that. We know that you go to DEF CON.
No kidding. We know that when the names of pupils, specifically names that indicate gender in teachers grading, when the names and genders of students are left off and there's a number there instead, teachers grading removes about 1/3 of the gender gap without even thinking about it. So we know that there is unconscious bias there that's causing people to be marked differently based on who they are, their gender, their perceived rightness for the field. And so it's what an interesting way of doing that. You can't avoid names, obviously, because you need to know who the person is, but avoiding the pictures, how do you even do that? I mean, Google Images is going to pop them all to the top anyway. Do you have like a filter or something, or?
No, and that's why I said I can't always do it. Sometimes that's the first thing that I see about someone, and then there's nothing I can do. I've already seen a picture of them.
It's really that's really funny, because you do see some.
It's not really any different than you know, you get a resume and maybe you can not look at the name. Maybe you've already had correspondence with somebody and they've told you the name 14 times and you can't forget the name even though you want to.
Okay, fair enough.
You know, it's one of those things that you try to keep in the toolbox, and sometimes you can use it and sometimes you can't.
That's one of the really, that's one of those 80-20 things, right? It is a serious way to decrease that. It's not perfect all the time, but it's a great rule of thumb to keep yourself as honest as you possibly can when it comes to that unconscious bias. That's really good, because so much of hiring really is gut. You're trying to express culture and try to find a great fit for the team that you already have. And all you can really do is say, I think this person seems like they'd get along with the people on the team, or they don't. So right. It's so hard, because how do you separate that out from the unconscious bias? Like, here's a person I think would be good on the team. And you start to develop that picture in your head, and you become unwilling, just exactly like you discussed, to think about somebody totally different. And it gives you that opportunity, if you don't see their picture first, to let yourself imagine that they look like the right person and then be surprised. And that's why it's so shocking, because I've done the same thing you have, is not seen someone. They walk up to me and I'm like, are you really who I'm here to have coffee with right now? And it's just very strange. So I had a woman with bright red dreadlocks, and I don't mean red like my hair, I mean like red like my lipstick dreadlocks, sit down at a table, and she had like a tattooed neck and everything like that. And she was coming at me for, I think it was a technical marketer position. And she was an HTML coder, and I looked at her and I went, well, oh, okay. You know, I was, for some reason, I just envisioned a much more buttoned up person, and like, you know, top button kind of person with, you know, severely braided hair. I have no idea. And I don't know what made me think that, but it could have been my own image. And she was just an extraordinary person. So I guess that's part of what it is. And I've been asking you questions all along that people have been filtering my way. Are there any questions or any things that you sometimes get asked that you want to talk about?
I don't think of anything off the top of my head.
Okay, fair enough. Well, I've got one last question that I'm going to ask you for your last advice to give to people who are trying to hire InfoSec professionals. So the last question that I have for you here is, oh, there it is. What are this is going to be a question you're going to be, you're going to have to answer more generally, I think. The person wants to know, what are the companies that do InfoSec that I should avoid, that are kind of fly-by-night situations? And I think a better way to phrase that might be, Louis, don't name names for us here, but instead talk about what kind of companies to avoid hiring InfoSec professionals from, or contracting with, if you're someone who's looking to get that expertise.
I think for that, you've got a couple of things. One, depending on the job that you're looking to have done, it may or may not matter who's doing it. For example, if you need someone to pen test your public website, that's a job that anybody on the internet can be doing already. Will the vulnerabilities get announced? If there's something there and someone's testing it without your knowledge, yes, they'll get announced. You have no control over that at all. They may be polite and give you a heads up, they may not. So in a situation like that, maybe it doesn't matter who you choose to do the job. You may also want to have several groups do the same work, and then you can compare the results and see, you know, is one of these groups getting more information back to me on what's going on than the others? You know, does somebody return something and say, nope, everything looks great, and the second group comes back and says, you've got a whole bunch of cross-site scripting that you may want to look into. The other thing I would say is you probably want, for jobs where you need to provide, for example, credentials or internal network access, you probably want somebody who is more established, and you can use that as a means of trust by proxy, as it were. You know, they've been around long enough that other companies are using them, and that lends a certain credence to the notion that you can also use them.
That works. Thank you. It's a great way to do it. And sometimes trust by proxy is really all we have. On a personal level, it's that reputation network, and on a company level, it's who are the logos of the people that they also service. Sometimes it makes some sense. All right. Any last thoughts before we get done for the day?
No, I wish everybody luck.
Thank you so very much, Lou. It's a pleasure having you here. Please do reach out and follow Louis Kowolowski on Twitter. He runs Crypto Monkeys Consulting, and he is a swell and awesome human being who can help you a great deal with your hiring needs. And I'm sure he's got a great big old network full of InfoSec professionals that he can point you at depending on what your needs are. So thank you so much, Louis. Folks, we will not have a Tarah Talks next week because it's my anniversary week and I'm going to go hang out with my husband instead of y'all. The week after that, we're going to have on July 1st, I believe, it will be a discussion on how to get into a tech accelerator with the amazing and brilliant women behind 9 Mile Labs here in Seattle. That'll be Brandy Rhodes and Caitlin Getz. Pleasure to have them here, and we'll look forward to seeing you again in 2 weeks. Thanks so much, Louis, and have a great week, folks. Bye-bye.
Yeah.